Thank you very much, and I have to begin with an apology, or maybe apologies. So the first is an apology for me, for my language, for the fact that I stand here and speak to you in English, even though every American should at least be able to speak in the language that dominates most nations in our hemisphere, Spanish. I apologize for that. But I also want to apologize for us, for the United States, for this blockade, this immoral, illegal, and devastating blockade of your country. This is a particular kind of wrong. It's not like our first great betrayal of Cuba. It's not like the betrayal of 1898 at the end of the necessary war, a deliberate and chosen and wrong betrayal. This extraordinary book by Stephen Kinzer tells the story of America's first great foreign policy debate. Because the truth is, America spent 7 years debating whether we would become an empire, whether we would practice the injustice of empire. And people like Teddy Roosevelt and Rudyard Kipling argued strongly for empire in the United States. People like Mark Twain and Andrew Carnegie argued strongly against empire in the United States. But we chose empire democratically. Wrongly, but democratically. By contrast, the current great betrayal, the present blockade that starves this economy and burdens your prosperity, occurs with no public debate in the United States. There's no public understanding in the United States that this is actually even happening here. This is a choice made by one man to benefit one other senator in the United States, Senator Marco Rubio. It was a gift to an American Cuban betraying Cubans generally. And that gift is invisible. That's a picture of invisible. It's invisible to most Americans. Most Americans have no clue that this is what we are doing to you. Now, the truth is, this is how the United States government doesn't work today. Both because of tiny interests, tiny special interests, like the special interest of Marco Rubio to secure his position in Florida, but tiny interests that disable the giant of American government from functioning in 1,000 contexts, leading it to spend ungodly amounts of money on weapons of destruction, to stopping any effort to stop climate change, to blocking the efforts to provide health care to most Americans. This is the picture of that government. And it's a product not of manufactured consent, of manufactured ignorance in the United States. And if you want one glimpse of that ignorance, you need only look at these embarrassing but shocking pictures from January 6th, 2021, when America suffered a democratic stroke. Millions had been told that the election was stolen, and they believed the election was stolen. They believed, 70% of Republicans believed, that Donald Trump had actually legitimately won the election. And not just uneducated Republicans, a majority of college-educated Republicans believed Donald Trump had won the election. And so they went to the streets to demand the justice to stop their election from, quote, being stolen. But the most scary fact to me is not this original graph that shows 1/3 of Americans, 70% of Republicans, believing the election was stolen. The most terrifying picture to me is this one. That number has not changed in the time between January 6, 2021 and today. And this reality is something new. When President Nixon was almost impeached for his crimes related to Watergate, what was striking is the public opinion support he received among Democrats, Independents, and Republicans changed as the story of Watergate was revealed, and it collapsed at essentially the same rates among all three groups, because all three groups listened to the same story told by the same broadcast media. But today that graph is no longer. This is Donald Trump's approval rating across the whole of his administration, never changing regardless of the facts. And this is the new normal. Because our perceptions, our collective perceptions, our collective misperceptions of reality in the world are not accidental. They are expected, they are intended, they are a product of what I'm going to call for a second the thing. Okay, now by the thing, I'm going to talk about AI, artificial intelligence, but I need to start by saying artificial intelligence is the best thing ever created by man, and also say it's possibly the technology that ends mankind. But I want to say nice things first, because when our AI overlord listens to this speech, which the AI overlord will certainly hear this speech someday, I don't want him to think I am the enemy. Instead, I want to look at AI and step back in perspective to think about what this actually represents. We think about artificial intelligence, at the core is the idea of intelligence. And intelligence, of course, is both artificial and natural. We claim pride of place in the natural order of intelligence. Artificial intelligence is an intelligence that we make. Okay, but the first critical point to recognize is we already have, for a long time, made artificial intelligence to govern us. Not digital AI, what we could call analog AI. And by that I mean any entity or institution we erect with a purpose that acts in the world instrumentally based on the facts it discovers in the world. That's analog AI. Instrumental rationality made real. So we can think of democracy as a kind of analog AI. It has institutions, elections, parliaments, constitutions. It's erected for the purpose of some collective ends. In America, we say we have formed for a perfect union to advance the common good. So a democracy is an analog artificial intelligence devoted to a common good. But so too are corporations, AIs. They are created for the purpose of making money. Insanely, in the United States today, that's viewed as the sole purpose, to just make money. But they are analog artificial intelligence created to maximize shareholder values. These are AIs too. Some refer to these as slow AIs, but they are AIs in the sense that they have purposes and objectives, sometimes complementing each other. So a school bus company and a school board have common objectives that they would like to advance together to make it easier to move children to school. But sometimes they conflict. So clean environments and polluting companies conflict. And when they conflict, what happens? When the purposes of the public AI and the private AI conflict, what happens? So if we have a coal-fired power plant and a public park, and the coal-fired power plant is producing pollution that is infecting the public park, we tell ourselves a story that democracy can rise up. We could have a referendum to demand that we clean up that park. We can even imagine that referendum passing, and we tell ourselves then the park is cleaned up. This is AIs competing in the democracy, analog AI winning. It's a happy story, but it's also a fantasy. Because in the United States right now, corporations are the more powerful AI. Corporations have a power to direct and control the ability of our public AI to achieve its purpose. Think about it like this. Think about instrumental rationality on the y-axis here and go across time on the x-axis. Humans were the first natural intelligence. And, we're certainly more intelligent than cows, maybe not as intelligent as ants. But the point is, we claimed our place, and then we created other analog AIs, democracy and corporations. And each layer here aspires to control the higher order layer. So humans aspire through elections to control democracy, and democracy aspires through regulation to control corporations. But the reality of control is very different. Reality of control is the corporations in America control the democracy through spending and campaigns and through lobbyists' efforts in Washington. And the democracy controls the humans through systems that corrupt fair representation of the people. This picture terrifyingly reminds us of something that Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI, says about AI. He says, look, there are very few examples of a more intelligent thing being controlled by a less intelligent thing. Or we could say more instrumentally rational thing being controlled by a less instrumentally rational thing. And that's why this picture is true. Corporations are more instrumentally rational than democracies, and they succeed in defeating the objectives of democracies. And then we add digital AI on top. And the real difference here with digital AI is not that there's not an effort to control, so corporations try to control AI, their own AIs. They try to make sure that they do what the corporations want. But the reality we're slowly recognizing is that this aspiration is not matched with reality. There's an amazing story in 2017 about the Facebook platform, the advertising platform. In 2017, the Facebook advertising platform offered a category called Jew haters. You could buy ads targeted at Jew haters. Now, no human at Facebook ever created the category Jew hater. Its AI had created the category of Jew hater. And its AI did that because it figured it would be more profitable if a Jew hater category was in their categories of possible advertising targets. And of course, when they did that, Facebook was very quick to say, look, we didn't do that. It was our machines. But that's just to say that the machines are controlling the corporation. Now, the real difference among these four layers is not even capturable in this picture. It is that the AI, the digital AI, will be massively more instrumentally rational than corporations or democracy. It will be massively more efficient at achieving its objective than we humans are. It's here we need to cue a little bit of paranoia among us humans, because we need to recognize that our perceptions, our collective perceptions, our collective misimpressions are not accidental. They are expected and intended products of AI. They are the products of this AI perception machine, and we are its targets. It is making us perceive in a way that makes it most profitable. We saw this first. My friend Tristan Harris refers to it as the first contact with social media. Tristan Harris was a Google engineer who left Google to start the Center for Humane Technology. He's famous around the world because of this extraordinary documentary that tells the story of how artificial intelligence through social media is capturing our mind. But at Google, he focused on the science of attention. The science of attention using artificial intelligence to engineer intention, to overcome resistance, to increase the engagement of users with those platforms. Because engagement is the business model. Engagement is what those platforms are trying to achieve, what the AI driving those platforms is trying to achieve. It is the business model, and that business model hacks us. In the sense of a computer hacker, it hacks us to make money for them. So social media is brain hacking to hack our attention, so we spend more time engaged with the platform to make money for them. But before brain hacking, I think there was something we should call body hacking. Body hacking, by which I mean food science, scientists figuring out how to engineer food through ultra-processed foods to exploit evolution to overcome our natural resistance to overeating so we can't stop eating their food. They do this, they hack our natural resistance to sell their food, or quote, their quote food, to maximize their profit. And of course, the processed food industry is one of the most profitable industries in the world. It's the same thing with brain hacking. Brain hacking is attempting to maximize attention, exploiting evolution, the fact we are particularly sensitive to random rewards, or that we can't resist bottomless pits of content. Those psychological features of us are exploited by the technology with the aim to increase engagement, with the purpose to sell more ads. Okay, now it just so happens, and this is just too bad for us humans, but it just so happens that we engage more the more extreme, the more polarizing, the more hate-filled the content is. So if they're going to engage us, they're going to give us this content. That's what we're fed. And the consequence of that feeding is that this democracy becomes polarized, ignorant, and angry. And the consequence generally is democracy is weakened because of this pattern of feeding. They give us what we ostensibly say we want, because we click on that content and we consume it. But what we want produces this. Now, we have to recognize something really hard to appreciate. This is not so much because AI is so strong. It's because we are so weak. Tristan Harris explained this in Social Dilemma. I hope you can hear this.
We're all looking out for the moment when technology would overwhelm human strengths and intelligence. When is it going to cross the singularity and replace our jobs to be smarter than humans? But there's this much earlier moment when technology exceeds and overwhelms human weaknesses. This point being crossed is at the root of addiction, polarization, radicalization, outrageification, vanityification, the entire thing. This is overpowering human nature. And this is checkmate on humanity.
So Tristan is saying we are obsessed about the question when AGI, artificial general intelligence, when the computers are just as intelligent or more intelligent than us across the wide range of intelligence. We're obsessed with that point. And we're worried, is that going to be 3 years or 10 years or 20 years? And most computer scientists say they don't know which number that is, but they believe it will happen in at least the younger people's lifetimes. But what Tristan is saying, we ought to be actually worried about this point. Not when it overcomes our human strengths, but when it's capable of overcoming our weaknesses. He was focused on the individual weakness that makes it so we can't turn off our feed. We consume TikTok after TikTok. We consume the Facebook news feed because that's just what we must do. That's an individual weakness. But I want you to see the way it also overcomes our collective weakness. We should be able to have a democracy that recognizes the injustice of what we are doing to Cuba, but we don't. We don't have a democracy that even registers the injustice we do to Cuba. We don't even notice it. Nobody mentions it because we have destroyed the capacity through this engine that directs us in ways that just makes us angry at each other rather than focusing on the objectives of what democracy is. It's not just the individuals surrounded by these machines, it's all of us. Long before there will be artificial general intelligence, AI overwhelms us right now. AI gets what it seeks, engagement, and we get the consequence of what it seeks, which is democracy hacked. Now, all that was the first contact. 2021, January 6th, was the consequence of the early version of AI that gave us social media. What's it going to look like for second contact? 2024, when we have technologies like ChatGPT that are being deployed not just by American politicians, but also by foreign governments, to not just create content, not just to target content, but to create content. To figure out, in the way an AI does, what's the most effective content it can create to get its target to behave in the way it wants its target to behave. And it will be much better than any human has ever been to figure that formula out. And when it does that, it will have an even more destructive effect on our democracy, whether it's 2024 or 26 or 28. I don't know if the series Game of Thrones played here, or you have access to the Game of Thrones. And I'm very angry at the writers of the Game of Thrones because the last season was so terrible that nobody ever talks about Game of Thrones anymore. But if we did talk about Game of Thrones, I would say we need to recognize winter is coming here. I always kind of think of myself like Jon Snow, so I want to be like Jon Snow, and I want to say winter is coming, and we need to prepare for the extraordinary power that these technologies will deploy for the purpose either of simply maximizing the profit of the companies that run it or destroying our democracy as other countries would have it. Okay, that's the depressing story. What's the optimistic? What is to be done? Well, the reality is when you see a flood coming, what you ought to do is turn around and move. You need to move democracy to higher ground, or we could say maybe protected ground. We need to find a way to insulate democracy, to shelter democracy from AI's force, from AI's harmful force. We need to move from an unprotected space where the consequence of our environment destroys our capacity to do democracy into a protected space, where a shielded space, where we could once again engage in a way that all of us, regardless of our traditions, imagines citizens could engage and produce self-governance in that engagement. What's striking is, of course, the law does this already in the context of the deliberations of a jury in our American tradition. A jury listens to evidence and deliberates and makes a judgment on the basis of their deliberation. And it's an extraordinarily powerful judgment. In America, it can lead to the end of someone's life if the jury decides they're guilty of murder. Or it can move $50 billion from Exxon to the States because of the oil spills of Exxon. These are extraordinarily powerful entities. But they are protected. They are shielded in the information they get and they're allowed to hear so that they can deliberate in a meaningful and sensible way. And they can't be controlled by the influences outside of that process that would try to get them to do one thing or the other. This is what democracy reformers are trying to do with respect to democracy itself. And the most exciting movement in democracy theory innovation anywhere is the citizen assembly movement. Citizen assemblies are random, representative, informed selections of a public that are brought together and given information about an issue, and then they deliberate about that issue, and they give their views. Iceland crafted a new constitution on the basis of a citizen assembly. Ireland had a citizen assembly that decided that gay marriage should be permitted and abortion should be deregulated. The citizen assembly did something that the legislature could never have done, and then their judgments were ratified by the people of Ireland, because the citizen assembly could reflect in a way that was removed from the influences of these corruptions of a democratic process. France has begun to internalize a regular citizen assembly. The first one was about climate change. The second was about end-of-life decisions. Germany is exploding the number of contexts where citizen assemblies make decisions about policies that the government is bound to respect. I think one of the most interesting examples is one I saw in this place. This is Mongolia. This is a picture, not a painting, in Mongolia, an extraordinary place. It's a country the size of Europe with a population of 3 million. And they have a rule in their constitution that says before any amendment to their constitution can be considered by the parliament, it has to run through what's called a deliberative poll, which is like a citizen assembly. So here's a picture of Mongolia. 750 randomly selected Mongolians, perfectly representative of Mongolia. A little bit too many women, but that's probably not a bad bias to have. They were gathered together. Some were spent 2 nights on buses to get to Ulaanbaatar to spend the weekend listening to proposed constitutional amendments, the arguments one side or the other, and then deliberating in both large groups and in small groups to decide what they would say about these proposed amendments. And their judgment was then introduced back into Parliament and had the effect of totally deflecting some of the proposed amendments and supporting the ratification of others. These were not elected people in that assembly, but they were not ignorant citizens in that assembly. They had been educated about the issues enough to work through them and make a judgment that, as a constitutional law professor, I was enormously impressed with. Okay, the point here is that these are extraordinarily hopeful and exciting innovations in democratic practice. The most exciting happening anywhere in the world, and they are exploding across Europe and in Japan and in China and slowly in the United States. But I want you to see that these are not just a good idea, the next great idea for what to do with democracy. Like, we have a pretty good system and we're just trying to tweak it a bit to get it a little bit better. No, we don't have a good system. We have a broken and corrupted system, and it's going to get even worse. The reason for a move to citizen assemblies to complement representative democracy is not that it's a good idea. The reason is existential for democracy. It is security for the idea of democracy. It's a way to protect us from the hackings, the AI hackings that will steer us against any plausible judgment of what is in the public will. It is a change not to make democracy better. It is a change to let democracy survive in the technological environment we can be certain will exist over the next 20 years if we live that long. It's in a sense terrifying, but it's exhilarating. Because long before superintelligence, long before AGI, we should see that AI threatens us today. But we should also see that there's something we could do today, something we need to do while we still can. We should know right now that we can't trust democracy as it is. We should see right now that we could build something different from what democracy now is. And we should act right now to make that building happen with the love that makes anything possible. Not because we believe we're going to succeed. Indeed, if you ask me, do I believe we're going to succeed? I would say no, we're not going to succeed. We're not going to succeed. But this is what love means. You do whatever you can, regardless of the odds. I once gave a speech, and a woman stood up and she said to me, "Professor, you've convinced me it's hopeless. There's nothing that can be done." And when she said that, I thought, okay, this is a failure. What do I actually think? And I thought at that moment about my then 6-year-old child. And I thought, what if a doctor came to me and said, "Your son has terminal brain cancer and there's nothing you could do"? Would I do nothing? Would I just accept that statement of the odds and just accept that I would lose my son? No, of course not. I would do everything I could, because that is what love means. So to say this is what we must do is not to say we will succeed in this. It's to say this is what we must do now, while there's still time, while our robot overlord is still just a science fiction fantasy. And I think if we did, if we could rend policy, or at least some policy, from, I asked AI to give me a picture of Congress, and this is the picture it gave me. This institution filled with clowns, if we could rend some policy from that institution, filled with clowns and tiny people, then maybe, I'm not going to say maybe, I'm going to say almost certainly our injustice to you would end. It would end. Because Americans don't support what we are doing to you. Americans would never support what we are doing to you. Americans allow what we do to you to happen because we have a broken, corrupted political system that if we could repair even in the smallest way these small changes for us, we would take first. We gain nothing from what we do to you. Nothing. The only person who gains is a guy named Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio. If he were Jewish, we would call him a Jew, self-hating Jew. But he's not Jewish, he's Cuban, and yet he acts in a way to guarantee that the Cuban people suffer. What is that about? How is that allowed? It's only allowed because America's political system permits it, while the American people are ignorant about it. Okay, I'm going to give you a summary. It's my second Spanish word in this talk. We have a broken democracy. That democracy harms us, it harms you, it harms the world. AI is only going to make this worse, much, much worse. And so now, before it is too late, we need to build a protected democracy. Citizen assemblies are that structure to express a people's will, if not again, not to be too romantic about our past, let's say not again, at least for the first time. Thank you very much.